as we were sitting here waiting to get going, we realized it's sea, space, and the sun. It's almost like earth, wind, and fire, but different. And I was like, if we'd had a few more minutes, we would have come up with a number for you, wouldn't we?
Next time.
Yeah, next time. So before I turn it over to the panelists to talk about things, I just want to kind of set up the stage for what we hope this discussion will be about, and when we open it up for Q&A to kind of plant the seeds of what you can be thinking about while our panelists are talking and answering the questions and what you might want to ask. From Chrissy's talk, everybody says Dr. Holmes, but I've known her for too long to say that. And so, from Chrissy's talk this morning, it spoke very close to home for me, since I work here at our CTSA center, and thinking that what they're doing at Northwestern and at the Galter Library, and how they're so very unique to be actually on an administrative level with their overall CTSA, I think is just fantastic. And I think they are perhaps the only library that has that honor. I don't know that I'm the only librarian who's fully paid for out of a CTSA right now as an evaluator, but there aren't many of us. I can know for sure. So, but the thing I think about that and what Chrissy was talking about, the collaborative innovation and building networks and things like that, which is kind of the focus of this panel, how we reach out and support one another. That one thing that I come into that role with as a librarian is I'm just hyper aware of the network that already exists because of libraries. It's like part of our DNA to be connected with one another. And when I watch other centers from other institutions try to make those connections, and it's when you're thinking of ways, if you happen to have CTSA or whatever it is that you are doing, what you're trying to reach out to, one thing that I think is a great selling point in terms of getting in the door with that center is if you can make a connection with another library or with another institution that way, because it's such a push now to do this collaborative work. And so much of science and so much social sciences and hard sciences and medical science and all of it is so cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary now that the more you know people, and librarians know one another. I mean, it's just this established network, a part of how we work. And so I encourage people to just kind of take advantage of that, as we're taking advantage of it today. And the other story, as Julie and I were talking about what we wanted this panel to do, is I just wanted to share one story of our own situation here at UMass. So we have a quantitative methods core, which is part of our quantitative health sciences group that's here, and they provide basically help in terms of research methodology and data management and statistical analysis and support for researchers. And at our last CCTS advisory board meeting, we were talking, and we have people from other CTSAs who come in and do, we talk to them, other PIs. And the thing that comes up all the time is they struggle too. Like our quantitative methods core struggles with getting out to researchers. They're like, we're the statisticians. We know data management. We know, and they have just as hard a time getting out to people. They face a lot of the same challenges and limitations that we do. So I think, as Julie and I were kind of planning about this, to keep in mind that we're not alone in the frustrations and the hurdles of trying to get to people and build those networks and make things happen. You have to be, what did Christy say? Pleasantly persistent in doing that, and we all have to do that. And it's not just librarians. We're not being picked on in any way, shape, or form. Everybody's kind of facing it. So what we're going to do is each of our panelists are going to talk for about 5 minutes or so and give us an overview of what they're doing in some of their situations. Then I have some questions for them, and we'll do some Q&A amongst the panel, and then we'll open it up for the audience to engage in. So we're going to start with Audrey.
Again, I'm Audrey. I'm with the MBLWHOI Library.
And we are a joint library that serves 5 institutions in Woods Hole, including primarily soft money funded scientists, but also including some students, joint program students, possibly other students, and government employees to some extent. So we have a good variety of users that we're trying to serve and reach out to, and who have very different situations as far as their needs and their priorities. We, do our best to kind of try to proactively reach out to people and talk about our services, particularly data management, which is, generally touches in all the areas that we work on. But sometimes, like we say, that falls on deaf ears, and so we also try to collaborate specifically on specific projects with different departments within our institutions and just virtual kind of organizations that I'm sure we've all seen are forming on the outside as well. In particular, I've worked on GeoLink, which has been an effort to use linked open data technology to bring together earth science data from different repositories and different providers without a huge cost of restructuring the data that is held in these repositories. And I feel like we've been pretty successful with that, and we're moving on to other projects that we could continue that work and make it even more applicable to more repositories. We also work with BCO-DEMO, which is the Biological Chemical Office, Data Office on our campus, which is a grant-funded organization, which is specifically a repository, but it's on our campus, and so we work really closely with them to try to meet all of their needs that they don't necessarily want to have in-house. Like, they have a repository, but they don't necessarily have an archived version of the data, so they use our repository to archive their data. We also provide them with DOIs and various other services as we are able to. And we also just try to be as in touch with our information services departments as is humanly possible, and have done some great projects in that way. And I guess I could go into more detail about that if necessary, but do I have time? I don't know. Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, so we've been in touch with them. For instance, we just got an Elements installation the last year, I think, and have been in touch with our our IT departments about how they can use that data. So that we're not, isolated in how we're doing bibliometrics, but how else is it applicable to the rest of our institution, to both the administration and their, determining HR factors and stuff, but also, how do we make it beneficial to our researchers and actually make them want to participate and not just be judged, because that's always an issue. So, yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I wasn't sure where the stop was there. So I'm Daina Bouquin. I am the head librarian at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Our library is called the John G. Wolbach Library. And we are commonly thought to be a Harvard library, but that's not the case. We're a split entity. I'm hired by both Harvard and the Smithsonian, 2 separate paychecks, the whole 9 yards. And we're actually the library of 2 observatories. So we're the library of the Harvard College Observatory and the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory. So what that comes down to is we're everybody's weird little stepchild to a certain extent. We're a little bit outside of everyone's umbrella. So what that means is we have to kind of try to leverage a lot of the connections we have inherently, knowing that there's going to be limitations to all of that and its applicability to us. And so we have to adapt a lot. Our community is made up of scientists, researchers, faculty, postdocs, engineers, about 3/4 of our community of about 1,000 people are actually Smithsonian. So the majority of our community is staff scientists, mostly spaceflight engineering and running large telescope missions. And then only the remainder is really our Harvard population. So we're both a government focus and academic focus in a lot of ways. Right now, we have a lot of things on the burner, which I don't think is going to be uncommon to anyone here. And I think everyone hits obstacles when they're trying to reach out to their community and define who their community is. One of the things that's been really wonderful about where we are is that our community, to a certain extent, is global. There are not very many astronomy libraries in the world, and there are a lot of observatories, especially in the Southern Hemisphere, who don't necessarily have access to the same kinds of resources we do. And so we wind up partnering with people all over the place. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. And I could describe some of the projects we have right now and some of the ways that they're collaborative, just to give you a sense of some of the stuff we're working on. So one of them, if you want to see more about this, the project is PHAEDRA, P-H-A-E-D-R-A. That's an acronym for Preserving Harvard's Early Data and Research in Astronomy. So we're starting a citizen science and major digitization effort of some logbooks logbooks taken. Basically, those are the documentation and the notes from a lot of the early calculations done for the first all-sky survey, done in the early to late 19th century, early 20th century going on. And there are calculations mostly done by women computers. So if you saw the movie Hidden Figures, that profession goes way back. And what we're doing is we've got a cache of about 2,500, pardon me, good God, notebooks that we're having digitized, hosted on the NASA Astrophysics data system, having them transcribed through a community, like a citizen science effort, the Smithsonian Transcription Service, and we're going to be having them tag drawings and early sketches in those notebooks and tables that we're then going to use a platform called Zooniverse to ascribe alt text to them so that they're more accessible. So you'll have full text searching capability on these notebooks that go back to the early 1800s. So we're excited about that and the potential to turn some of that old information into new useful science. So you'll be able to actually have your tables back, your data. You can turn that into Excel spreadsheets. So that's kind of one of our newer projects going on. We're also leading the development of a tool called the Unified Astronomy Thesaurus, which is an attempt to come up with a linked data-controlled vocabulary for astronomy that we're going to be expanding out from space objects and types of astronomy disciplines out into methods and into instrumentation. And so what we're going to be doing with that is partnering with the NASA Astrophysics data system, which is kind of like PubMed for astronomy, and the AAS, which is the American Astronomical Society. And what we're going to be doing is a case study. They're funded by the Sloan Foundation on software citation and helping come up with some best practices for software citation using our community as a case example. We do also support data deposit, and a lot of what our community has to deal with right now is what is data when you're studying pictures and you're writing software to render anything. What is data is a pretty fun question. And although our major missions do have their own repositories and staff that man them, they're outliers. The majority of the community does not have that kind of support, and so what we're seeing is that we can help fill the gaps there. And I'm trying very hard to make sure that when we're offering support through training and events and programming for those technical needs, we're not ignoring some of the sociological aspects that go along with what they're facing. And I think that I'm excited to talk about some of the ways we've built out our community and found our champions and what has not worked as well. So.
My name is Yvette Woell, and I'm the library manager at Argonne National Laboratory. And for those of you that may not be familiar with national labs and what they do, Argonne is one of 17 national laboratories sponsored by or owned by the Department of Energy. And so we are owned by the Department of Energy, and we're located just 30 miles approximately southwest of Chicago. And we are a federally funded research facility, and yet we are employees of Argonne National Laboratory. So the Department of Energy contracts with UChicago Argonne LLC to actually manage the laboratory on the government's behalf. And so we have a really hybrid model that is partially academic and partially government. So we're really a little bit of both. And so we have many of our researchers coming from academic areas, and so they expect that freedom to publish and freedom to do research on their own, and yet they have the government restrictions that they have to deal with on a regular basis. And so we work very closely with them to try to help them comply with the government restrictions that are required. So Argonne has approximately 3,000, a little over 3,000 employees, and of that, about 1,600 of them are scientists and engineers, and they perform research across the entire spectrum of science. We have high-performance computing scientists, we have material scientists, physicists, chemists, chemical engineers, transportation engineers, and so over the 70-year history of the laboratory, we have built up a library that reflects those expanding interests as more and more of the research becomes multidisciplinary. Now, that's the library piece, but then parallel to it, as I mentioned, we are a government facility, and so there is also a history of a scholarly communications process. And so up until a few years ago, this was a totally separate process whereby under DOE policy, researchers were required to submit articles, conference papers, technical reports for an internal review before they were distributed outside of the laboratory. And then we would collect that information and we would deposit it with the Department of Energy Office of Scientific and Technical Information, or OSTI, and then OSTI would then populate their SciTech Connect database with the information that all the national labs provided. So this was a separate process up until a few years ago, and back in about 2009, there was an opportunity for the library to absorb the scholarly communications process, because it seemed to be a perfect opportunity for synergy between what the librarians were doing, helping manning the reference desk, doing collection management, interacting with the scientists on a regular basis, and yet we had this other arm that was involved strictly with capturing their publications, and it seemed to be a great opportunity to kind of leverage that information and say, we can do some business analytics here. We can look to see who's publishing in what areas, and instead of it just becoming a requirement on the part of the researchers that they deposit their information for this review process, we now were able to provide back analytics that indicated, this is perhaps an area where you've done a lot of publishing. These are the people that you're working with, collaborating with on your papers, and it's an opportunity for us to give back to the researchers information that they can then use to make decisions as to which grants they might want to pursue in the future. It also gives management an opportunity to examine which areas of the laboratory are actually working in which areas. And so we've more and more become involved in business analytics. In the area of data, that came to us primarily as a result of the OSTP memo of 2013, and then DOE public access policy in 2014. And so all of a sudden our researchers were being told that you need to provide an accepted manuscript, and you need to provide it to OSTI, and you also need to have a data management plan as part of your funding proposal. And so the library took on the role of assisting researchers with that, and we did it by taking our liaisons, our reference librarians, who also did collection management, and have them interact with the researchers as far as assisting them with their data management plans. And because most of our work is funded by the Department of Energy, we decided against using the DMP tool, but rather we customized something specific to the Department of Energy so that they could simply take the template that we provided to them and insert it into their funding proposal, and it would have all the elements that were required by the Department of Energy in an effort to make it easier for the researchers. So that's something that fell to the subject specialists, the reference librarians. Then on the scholarly communications side, we are now collecting the accepted manuscript, which the researchers are required to provide to OSTI if they receive DOE funding, and we are submitting it on their behalf. And as a side result of that, we are building an internal-facing repository so that we now have available to all of our scientists and engineers the full text of all of the publications that the laboratory has authored within the past, basically since October of 2014. So we're collecting an internal-facing repository, which we are slowly, we aren't nearly as far as some of the academic librarians and libraries, but we are slowly starting to export that to an external website as well, so that you can go to the Argonne National Laboratory website and you can do a search on publications by author, title, find out which departments are doing what kinds of research. So it's an outreach activity that is being spun off from our internal system. We are also, as part of the review process, it used to be strictly related to the publication itself. We've expanded upon that in the past year to the point now where there is a question available as part of the submission process as to what are they doing with their data. Are they posting it externally? If so, we ask them to provide a URL showing which repository they're posting their data to. If they're saying that they are not required to have public-facing data, then they can indicate that as part of the submission process. Or if they decide that they really do have data that supports the publication, but they don't really have a repository in which to host it, we then provide them with a DOI for their data. We work closely with OSTI to mint the DOI, and then we post their data to Box. And so it's all part of the submission process so that they don't have to go outside or try to find a place to put their public-facing data. And one of the areas that we're now moving into now, as I mentioned to begin with, is business analytics, because we're receiving requests from the lab management to provide them more information. We're also, we've recently absorbed records management into the library and content management, so now we're looking at facilitating collaborative platforms such as Box and managing the where the content lives and where the records are managed throughout the life cycle of the information.
Back to me. I know, we'll just pass around. So I'm going to just swap around my questions here because I'm just going to follow up. Yvette gave a nice, update on a lot of their data management practices and what the things that you're doing, which is really interesting. So I'm going to jump to that, and then we'll come back to the networking professional stuff. But I am curious because we've heard and people have shared in the breakout sessions and all about the projects getting set up and processes getting set up and trying to do this outreach work. And if you can share, Yvette started to share some of the things they're doing, maybe talk a little bit about things that you've done, the challenges you've overcome a little bit, or some of the hurdles you're still trying to get over, just some common themes maybe that you've encountered, and what's worked, what hasn't worked, the advice that you could offer up. And we don't have to go in order. You can pick however you. Flow. No.
So, one of the biggest challenges we face is that we're a very small team. So we have 5 librarians. I have 5 full-time people, and I have some part-time students, and everything else is us trying to build collaborations with others, because you only have so many hours in the day, And one of the things I think that we're still trying to overcome is how to both prioritize what we're trying to work on and set reasonable expectations for those things to come to fruition, and also manage the timelines of the collaborators that we're going to come to depend on. So not only do you have to recruit your collaborators and get them interested in your ideas and get them wanting to invest their time and seeing the value in it, you now have to work around their schedules, and you already have your own tight timelines. And so I think that that's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately, but I think that we're learning how to strategize a little better. With that, I think planning up front some pretty clear timelines and always making sure that if there are things to be done, if they're higher up in the order of operations, so to speak, that those are things that we take on ourselves to every extent possible because we have more control over them. I think that being as forgiving as you can with expectations with your collaborators is also important, and being super willing to be flexible has been really essential for us. So if the target moves, that doesn't mean there's not still a target kind of idea. And when it comes to actually finding collaborators and finding the right people who have the ideas for the projects that we want to pursue, I think that it's been really essential for us to step out of library land. So we proactively go to conferences that have nothing to do with libraries in every chance we get. So I've gone to discipline-specific conferences, astronomy-specific conferences like Dot Astronomy or any of the kind of national or international meetings, but also kind of identifying the problem that you have and a community that has a similar problem. Not necessarily a librarian solving that problem, but reaching out. So for instance, I was invited to speak at a hackathon workshop at a conference called CSCW, which is Computer Supported Collaborative Work. And a lot of the people there are sociologists and anthropologists and people looking at time-bounded events and how you make the most of them, things like that, but they have a lot of similar problems. So not being afraid to kind of step out and say, I'm the only librarian in the room who wants to work with me. That I have found, honestly, to be like, people are usually really receptive to that. They want to know what you have to say, and even if they don't want to know what you have to say, you can listen to them. I think some of the things that have not worked and some of the challenges we still have to overcome, a lot of it has to do with timing still. So when we have events and we have programs and we're trying really hard to respond to something people have asked for, you have to be realistic about people's schedules. You can't schedule a whole bunch of stuff in a row and then expect people to be able to come to them on short notice. Like, you need to give people really far out notice for something that's going to take a whole day or half a day. You need to be really aware of other people's timelines, and I think that raising our community more broadly, their expectations for what a library can do, is something we're still working on. So trying to do our best to show what we're working on more than talking about what we're working on. That's been kind of key.
So I'd just like to follow up on that a little bit. What we have discovered over the years is that researchers are very busy people, and if we have library-sponsored, whether it be a brown bag or a special session, it really doesn't matter. It's difficult to get them to come to us, so we too have gone out to them more. So we go visit them in their offices. The first few data management plans where we worked on with individuals, we actually went out to their office and said, you know, are you even aware that DOE now requires that you have a data management plan? And if so, here are some things that we think we could do to help you, and, you know, would you be interested in working with us? The other area that we found where there was an audience that was very receptive is with the younger researchers. So, you know, if you look for an organization on your campus or on your facility where they perhaps are appealing to a certain segment of researchers. So for example, we have our postdoc society on campus, and the postdoc society has been very receptive as far as listening to what the library has to say and promoting our participation in some of their meetings so that we get the word out to the younger researchers again as to what services we can provide. And we think that that's been relatively effective. Another organization that we tapped into was the Women in Science group on the site. And so they too were very receptive of the library message and very interested in learning what resources and services we provide in addition to just a library, but what we can do as far as data management, and particularly now with hosting and providing them with DOIs for the data that supports their publications.
Excuse me. I think those are really awesome points. I definitely agree that having the right expectations is key when you go into trying to just introduce yourself, or showing up at a staff meeting or something along those lines. People may have an interest, but they may not necessarily have a vision for how the library can help them in those particular areas that you might at least have a topic of conversation to talk about, but it might actually take a little while and some kind of impetus, some kind of emergency possibly, for them to actually come to talk to you about what you can do. So we try to be patient, and we try to just keep persisting. And just identifying, because we often have clubs and meetings and stuff that are happening on campus, and we just try to show up whenever we can, even if we really have nothing to add to the conversation, just to make sure that we're aware of emerging needs, or the people on campus who actually have an interest in these things. And we can obviously contact those people specifically, but it's just great to have an opening to talk to people if I show up, or I'm commenting on the Python thread, or we don't have an official liaison program, but we do have several departments that have overlapping needs, so we try to be visible in those areas. One challenge that I think really got to me when I first started this position was that not everything gets off the ground. And even though it might be a good idea, and maybe you had the right person in the room at that moment, now that you're not in the room with them, it's not really a priority for them. And so that was a learning curve for me, was just I have to always make sure that I'm making this pay off for whoever I'm trying to work with. Because everyone may want to just do what's right, just increase access or what have you. But if it's not a visible benefit to them or their department or what have you, then you're not going to get any traction. So I think it's just trying to be patient and look for all the right angles when it comes to that. And I would also add that it helps to try things more than once. It's one of my favorite Simpsons quotes. I don't understand why we only try things once. Maybe that workshop was poorly attended that month because, like you say, other people's schedules, they had grants, due that month or whatever. Do it again, just depending on obviously your schedule. But if your job is to provide service, then it's still worth your time to try to be available. So that would be my tip. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something about the kind of getting in the same room conversation and just showing up. Invite yourself to the meeting. So I have found that work out more often than not. It hasn't always been the best thing, but if you find out there's a conversation going on that you think you should be a part of, invite yourself to the meeting. Crash the meeting if you have to. Just get in the room.
Yeah, and if you have a session and one person shows up and that one person is very interested and you have a good conversation, that's a successful session to me. I
like Audrey, what you said about the benefits, and kind of thinking that through first, what's the benefit for these people for me doing this, and kind of really having that in your head almost as a selling point before you go in to think, it's good for us, good for you, how can you really express that? That was really great. I wanted to follow up on one thing that Daina said, and this links over to the other thing that we wanted to talk about today in terms of data and data management and information management and the things that happen in this room. And we can see the number of disciplines that are represented in this room and the different types of institutions that are represented in this room, because the work that is happening is somewhat neutral, so to speak. So once upon a time, if you were, say, a medical reference librarian, the Medical Library Association was the place where you would get the support that you needed professionally. But when you're doing something that's it doesn't fit in any bigger discipline, it sort of stands on its own but supports lots of different things, how do you go about building a collegial network and a support network? Do you think it's important to have that, or not? You can, maybe you don't. I don't know. But how do you kind of do that? And also, and Daina was talking about going to different meetings. Like, how do you balance that? I'm curious myself. How do you balance that in terms of there's only 5 of you, there's 1,000 meetings people can go to? How do you ever pick that? How do you ever afford that? How do you like that sort of a thing? Yeah.
Usually limited by money.
Yeah. So those sorts of things.
So yeah, I think that networking is essential to certainly what we do, and it is much more so than I ever thought when I was in library school. Like, basically touches every aspect of what I do, because I can't do anything by myself, and we can do very little in the library that will make a real significant impact on everybody on campus, which is obviously the ultimate goal. So networking within our campus, but then also within these various disciplines, we try really hard to attend some meetings very consistently, and our directors do a really great job of finding funding for that, for different situations, ESIP, AGU, RDA, and the way that we get funding for those is generally to be as involved as we can. Try to do poster sessions, try to be involved in committees, because if you can show that you are, contributing to the greater good, then typically, you can find some place that will give you the money.
So when it comes to, I guess, meetings specifically and conferences, I say the best thing I've found to do is ask someone else to pay for you if you don't have the funds. So we are limited, like anyone else, in the amount of funding we get for travel, and we try very hard to make it so at least everyone can go to at least one thing they want to go to with funding that we have internally. But it helps, especially if it's going to be, I found that it helps, especially if you're trying to go to a conference that isn't a library conference, that you think might be peripherally interesting, you have some ideas about what you'd want to share and what you'd want to get out of it, contact someone who can help you. So reach out to the person organizing, like that CSCW thing I did with hackathons, the organization paid for me to go. So I reached out to the workshop organizer, said, I have some ideas, I can't come to your meeting, can you get me there? And they were actually really responsive. So I think, though, that making sure you're getting a good balance, I try very hard to make sure that any of our attendance at meetings is problem-driven and or community building. So it's either something we specifically are looking to learn more about. It's not just something we vaguely have some interest in. It's specifically something that we feel like we can ask questions about, that we can share with, and that we can really contribute and make new connections. Or it's something that we're already deeply involved with and that we have a community that we want to continue to support. In astronomy librarianship, there's actually, because it's such a small community, we only have a meeting as a group every 4 years. So we have the LISA conference, which is Library and Information Science and Astronomy. And because we have a very kind of awkwardly tight-knit but very infrequently together group. I think it makes it so that you can kind of spread out a little bit, but it is a balancing act. I found, even as a way to kind of build more connections with our scientists, outside of asking for the organizers to, like, get me to your meeting, I have an idea, I have a question, or help me learn how I can contribute better. I've gotten funding from our scientists to attend various conferences. So if I am working with one of our solar physicists on some accessibility measure he has with some of his research, or he's got some questions about what do I do with a terabyte of data a day coming from the sun? Like, what do I do with that? And if I've been having those conversations and I want to continue to have those conversations with other scientists, and he thinks what I've been contributing is useful, he supported my attendance at AAS. So I think that it's use the limitation as an ability, as just a networking tool. Just showing up and being at the meeting, I don't think is enough for it to be valuable anyway.
I think I'll come right back because you can address it. So beyond just the financial piece, which is, that's always a big deal, but so I liked when you said about I need to find a meeting that's specifically problem solving. So how do you find that meeting? Like doing what you're doing, like how do you identify the group? And maybe other people can answer that.
I can say a little bit about how I have the best team in the world, is what that comes down to, I think, for me, because I am not someone who really has the time to keep up with the library literature, all of the other literature. I have a cohort of people in my library, like the team is really it, who we kind of divvy up the looking for the answers work. And we also go up the food chain a bit. So we've found mentors in libraries and in our director's office who, when I have a problem and I go to them and they're not librarians, and I'm like, I don't know how to address X, they might have an idea for something that's peripherally relevant from their world. And I think it's a matter of finding the right people who keep track of the right things, because you're never going to keep track of all the things. But find one person with a similar interest or problem and see what they're talking about. Ask them, because there's a lot.
So I'd just like to build upon that a little bit by saying that within the Department of Energy and the National Laboratories in particular, we're a pretty tight-knit community in that there are 17 laboratories across the country, and we do meet on a very regular basis. The NLLC, which is the library arm, meets annually, and we actually then, it works as somewhat of a consortium. So we make joint purchasing decisions. We decide what kinds of resources perhaps we can't afford on our own, but as a consortium, maybe we can get together and make our purchases. So we use that as a working group meeting. So we're very tight-knit, and we have a lot of close working relationships with one another. Also on the scholarly communications arm, it's very similar in that DOE OSTI has an annual meeting just for the national laboratories. And again, there we're meeting to talk about compliance-related issues, such as providing them with the accepted manuscript and what we're doing in data management plans and exchanging best practices in order to be responsive to the regulations that are coming down on the national laboratories from DOE. Again, looking at professional development, we do try whenever possible to send each librarian to one conference a year in their respective area of specialization. And so, again, we have a very small staff. There are 8 people plus me, and we handle the library as well as the scholarly communications effort. And then we have 2 people that we just brought on board for records and content management. So we're pretty lean. And so we do try, when it's outside of our area of execs specialization, to attend webinars. And I have found some of the best information available on free webinars. And it's a great way, just on your lunchtime, you can sit in on a webinar and learn so much from the various organizations. The other thing is we have tapped into what the publishers are doing. And so we've invited ACS on campus, and when they come on campus to talk about how to get your journal articles published in an ACS journal, we then make sure that there's time in that meeting for the library to talk about the services that we provide and also what the requirements and compliance issues are for them as researchers working for the Department of Energy. So, again, Scholarly Kitchen, which is a RSS feed kind of thing. So that's another great place for information. You don't always think of the publishers as being, providing you with information that's applicable, but that particular listserv is great as far as getting information that is kind of peripheral to what we might do on a regular basis, but it's wonderful for seeing information from another perspective.
As far as identifying organizations and conferences, I think when I started, I went to a couple different conferences, all of which were great, but it was really, I ended up, trying to choose a focus, So I've been focusing more on ESIP, for instance. Our co-director, Lisa Raymond, focuses a lot on RDA, and we all kind of have a thing like that where we, try to find a group that's not necessarily library specific, so that, we both have a lot to offer to it, but we can gain so much from it. So I don't know about how I identified that group, but, recommendations, obviously networking, people will come and tell you, when you really need to attend to something.
I know we're at 4:30, and actually we're a little past. But I do want to so I want to be mindful of the time of the program. But I do want to give at least the audience the opportunity to kind of chime in, because we do want to have a little bit of discussion. If people have other thoughts or ideas to share, things that have worked for you, ways that you build a network. I think this is certainly a network that's grown for the last 9 years. This symposium has happened, and it's grown, and it's represented lots of different people, and it keeps going that way. So I think that's a bonus that we all know about this one. We can do that. But are there questions for a specific panelist or comments in general that folks would like to share? Julie's got a microphone.
I just want to commend the panel. This is a terrific panel, and I learned a lot. I think your perspectives were really wonderful to get to hear about how you're serving your unique clientele. And I think, everyone made comments that showed me how you're tuning into the messages that they're giving you. It was just really wonderful, so thank you.
So the first question to Audrey was specific about elements, to talk about that, and then to the whole panel in terms of what repository, is that what you're saying, Michelle? Like what kind of tools that people or technology folks are using? Oh, I have to give you that.
Yes, symplectic elements was the installation that I was referring to. And I wasn't quite sure. I'm a little unsure of what the general knowledge is on it, but it's a great product that we are using to kind of really take our bibliometric services to another level, to really keep track of our institutional publications, our authors' work, and also credit for all sorts of other things aside from publications. And we're also using Vivo with that, just FYI, as a public-facing site. Our institutional repository is a DSpace repository.
Hi. So we try very hard to not be too prescriptive with what we tell people to use for repositories, because larger missions have huge data needs where they may have to build their own infrastructures. And at that point, we kind of advise and guide with what their options are. And we try very hard to be cognizant of the fact that they probably wrote all of their own tools, and there may be a repository that they can take advantage of. When it comes to things that are a little bit more manageable, that aren't part of major pipelines or major missions, the tool we point people towards that is our favorite is actually Zenodo, which is a CERN platform. It's kind of supported by the EU. CERN has basically said they will preserve the long tail of science for you, and it is very much slanted towards the physics and astronomy community. It also has webhooks to GitHub so that you can actually mint a release and preserve your whole Git tree, which has been really useful for our community. And you can build yourself little communities within the setup. That's been really useful, and we've actually had people in our community use it to publish conference proceedings as well, because it does mint DOIs, and so it's been really the default for us, but we do have members of our community who have put things in Dataverse and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So again, we're a little bit different from some of you in that it is both DOE and Argonne policy that they are to submit their publications for review before they leave the laboratory. And so we have a compliance issue there. So basically a researcher, anytime they wish to create an information product that is intended for outside distribution, they are to submit their journal article, their technical report, their conference paper, their poster, for example, the posters today, they would have gone through our review system. And our system was really intended originally to be a routing system, but because of the wealth of metadata that we have available in there, we then took the next step and made it more of an internal-facing repository. So within the lab itself, all employees have access to search on all of those different types of publication types and actually view the full text, see what the poster looked like, see what the conference paper contained. Now, some of that, and that's an internally built system. We built that ourselves because it has the routing elements as well as the display search and retrieval elements. What we did for the external system that we just brought online this last year is we export out of our internal system onto a Drupal platform, and Drupal actually serves the information because that's what the external website is based upon, is Drupal.